I was 31 years old, had never missed a bill payment in my life, and was sitting across from a mortgage loan officer who was looking at her screen with an expression I did not understand. She had been friendly and professional for the first 20 minutes of our meeting. Then she pulled up my credit report and her whole face changed. Not dramatically. Just a subtle shift, the kind you notice when you are paying attention. She typed something, clicked something, typed again. Then she turned the monitor slightly toward me and said, "Can you help me understand some of these accounts?" I leaned forward and looked at the screen. There were 14 open credit lines I had never seen before. 2 car loans. A personal loan for $40,000. 6 credit cards with balances totaling just over $90,000. A medical debt from a hospital in a city I had never visited. And a collections notice from a utility company in a state I had not lived in since I was 19 years old. My credit score, which I had checked myself 8 months earlier and which had been 712, was now 481. I told her I had no idea what any of those accounts were. She nodded slowly and said, "You may want to contact the credit bureaus. This looks like it could be identity theft." I sat in that chair for another 10 minutes going through the paperwork she printed for me, and then I drove home in a kind of silence that had nothing to do with quiet. My mind was moving fast and loud and I just needed my hands on a steering wheel and a destination so I could think. I want to tell you exactly how long it took me to figure out who had done this. It took 4 days. 4 days of phone calls, credit bureau disputes, pulling account applications, requesting identification records from lenders. 4 days of working backward through 6 years of financial destruction that had been built on my name while I was living my life completely unaware. And when I finally had enough information in front of me to see the shape of what had happened, the name attached to almost every single account was not a stranger's. It was my brother's. His handwriting on some of the paper applications. His phone number listed as a secondary contact on 3 of the accounts. His address, an address I recognized immediately because I had sent him a birthday card there 2 years ago, appearing on documents for a car loan taken out in my name that had gone to collections 18 months prior. My brother Marcus is 4 years older than me. We are not close in the way some siblings are close, but we had what I thought was a functional relationship. We talked on the phone every few weeks. We showed up at family events. We did not have a history of conflict or animosity. He had struggled financially for most of his adult life, job instability, a divorce that cost him significantly, a period of what our mother described as him just going through things that none of us fully understood. I had lent him money twice. Small amounts, a few $100s each time, and I had never asked for either back because I understood he could not repay it and because he was my brother and I did not want money to be a source of tension between us. I thought I had been generous. I thought I had been understanding. What I did not know was that while I was being generous and understanding, he had been systematically using my identity to fund a life he could not afford on his own name. The first account had been opened 6 years and 3 months before I sat in that mortgage office. It was a credit card with a $2,000 limit. The application had been submitted online. My social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, the answer to every security question any institution might ask, he had all of it. I do not know exactly when or how he obtained it. What I know is that he used it, and then he used it again, and then again, and the accounts multiplied and the balances grew and the payments were missed and the collections notices piled up somewhere in a system that tracked everything under my name while I remained completely unaware because I was not in the habit of pulling my credit report more than once a year and because I had no reason to suspect that anyone, let alone my brother, was doing this. I sat with that information for an entire day before I called him. I want to be precise about that day because it matters. I did not call him in the first hour because I was afraid of what I would say. I did not call him in the first 4 hours because part of me was still hoping I was wrong, that there was some explanation I had not found yet, some clerical error or coincidence that would resolve this into something manageable. I spent most of that day going back through the documents, finding more connections, closing every alternative explanation one by one. By evening there were no alternative explanations left. I made a list of every account I had found with his name or information attached to it. There were 11 of them. The total outstanding debt across those accounts was $163,000. I wrote that number down and looked at it for a long time. Then I called him. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was normal. Casual. He asked how I was doing. I told him I needed to ask him something directly and I needed him to be honest with me. He said okay. I asked him if he had ever used my name or my social security number to open any financial accounts. There was a pause. Not a long one. Maybe 3 seconds. And then he said, "Where is this coming from?" That answer told me everything. An innocent person does not respond to that question with "Where is this coming from?" An innocent person says no. I told him I had the documentation in front of me and that I needed him to tell me the truth. Another pause. And then he said, "It's more complicated than you think." I told him that nothing about what he had done was complicated. He had stolen my identity. He had opened accounts in my name without my knowledge or consent. He had destroyed my credit over a period of 6 years while I had no idea it was happening. He had done this to his own brother. I told him I needed him to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, and then I read him the number. $163,000. He was quiet for a long time. And then he started talking, and the explanation he gave me was the most painful thing I had ever listened to. Not because it was a good explanation. There is no good explanation for what he did. It was painful because of how ordinary it was. He had been drowning financially after his divorce and had convinced himself the first account was temporary, that he would pay it off before it became a problem, that I would never find out because he was going to fix it. And then he could not fix it, and so he opened another account to manage the first one, and the logic of someone who is in financial panic and has already crossed a line they cannot uncross took over from there. He was not, by his own account, a calculating predator who set out to ruin me. He was a desperate person who made a catastrophic decision and then kept making it because stopping felt impossible. I do not tell you that to generate sympathy for him. I tell you that because understanding what happened did not change what had happened, and I want to be honest about the fact that the explanation, as ordinary and human as it was, did not make me feel better. It made me feel worse. A stranger stealing my identity would have been easier in some ways. A stranger is not someone you had Thanksgiving dinner with. A stranger is not someone your mother calls you asking about. A stranger's actions do not require you to decide, in the middle of the worst financial crisis of your life, what your relationship with your family now looks like. I told him I was going to report it. He asked me not to. I told him I did not have a choice. He said we could figure out another way. I told him there was no other way. I had $163,000 of debt in my name that I had not incurred, and the only path through it ran directly through a formal fraud report. He said that would destroy his life. I said he had already destroyed mine, and I hung up. The process of reporting identity theft and disputing fraudulent accounts is not fast, and it is not simple, and I want to be clear about that because accounts of this kind of thing sometimes make it sound like filing a police report and submitting a fraud claim resolves everything within a few weeks. It does not. I filed a police report the day after I spoke to Marcus. I contacted all 3 credit bureaus and placed fraud alerts on my accounts. I began the process of disputing each fraudulent account individually with each respective lender, which required documentation, written statements, copies of the police report, and in some cases multiple rounds of correspondence before the account was acknowledged as fraudulent and removed from my credit history. The disputes took 14 months in total. Some lenders were cooperative and responsive. Others pushed back, asked for additional verification, or initially declined to remove the accounts from my record on the grounds that the personal information used to open them matched my actual information, which of course it did, because my brother knew my actual information. Those cases required escalation to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and in 2 instances to an attorney who had experience with identity theft recovery. I retained her on a contingency basis, and she was worth every penny of the contingency. During those 14 months I could not obtain any new credit, could not proceed with the mortgage, and had to put a number of financial plans on hold because my credit profile was in active dispute and any new inquiry would have complicated the process. I also had to have a conversation with my employer's HR department because a background check had flagged a collections account connected to my social security number, and I needed to document the fraud before it affected my employment standing. That conversation was one of the more humiliating experiences of my life. Not because my employer was unkind, they were actually quite understanding, but because I had to sit across from a stranger and explain that my own brother had done this to me, and say those words out loud to someone I barely knew, and watch them absorb that information. My mother called me 2 weeks after I filed the police report. Marcus had told her what had happened before I had the chance to. The version he told her was not entirely inaccurate, but it was framed in a way that emphasized his desperation and the context of his difficult years and arrived at the conclusion that family should handle family matters without involving the legal system. My mother did not tell me I was wrong to report it. She is a careful woman and she understands the difference between right and wrong. But she asked me if there was any way to work it out without the police report. I told her there was not. She said she understood. She cried on the phone. I told her I was sorry that she was in the middle of this, and I meant it. That part was not Marcus's fault or my fault. She was just a mother whose 2 sons were now on opposite sides of a legal matter, and there was no good position for her to occupy in that situation. Marcus was charged 14 months after I filed the report. The charge was identity theft and fraud. He entered a plea agreement that included restitution, probation, and no prison time. I was not involved in the plea negotiation. The prosecutor's office kept me informed of the process and gave me the opportunity to submit a victim impact statement, which I did. I said what was true, that what he had done had cost me 14 months of my life, a mortgage I had been working toward for 3 years, a significant amount of money in legal and administrative costs, and a degree of trust in people close to me that I was still working to rebuild. I also said that he was my brother and that I hoped the outcome of this process would result in him building a life on a foundation he had actually earned. I do not know if I fully meant that when I wrote it. I think I meant it in the way you mean things that are true in principle before they have had time to become true in feeling. The last fraudulent account was removed from my credit report 4 months after the plea agreement. My score, rebuilt from scratch with new accounts opened in my name and managed carefully, crossed 700 again 11 months after that. I closed on a house 8 months after my credit score recovered. A smaller house than the one I had originally been looking at, in a different neighborhood, with a higher interest rate than I would have qualified for 3 years earlier. But mine. Fully, cleanly, legally mine. I have spoken to Marcus twice since the plea agreement. Once at a family gathering that I attended because my mother asked me to and because I decided that punishing her for his actions by removing myself from family events was not something I was willing to do. We did not discuss what had happened. We talked about surface things for a short time and then moved to opposite ends of the room. The second time was a phone call he made to tell me he had gotten a job and was making his restitution payments. I told him I was glad to hear it. I was not sure if that was entirely true, but I said it because it was the version of myself I was working toward. What I want to say to anyone who has gone through something like this, or is going through it now, is that the bureaucratic part of identity theft recovery is survivable. It is slow and it is grinding, and there are days when you will be on hold for 45 minutes to speak to someone at a credit bureau who will tell you to send documentation you have already sent twice. There are days when the sheer administrative weight of undoing what someone else did to you will feel completely disproportionate to anything you deserve to be dealing with. But it is survivable. The credit rebuilds. The accounts get removed. The mortgage eventually happens. The harder part, for me, was the recalibration of trust. Not distrust of everyone, I did not become paranoid or closed off. But a more honest accounting of the fact that the people closest to you are the ones who know the most about you, and that knowing a lot about someone is a kind of power, and that power is not always used the way you assumed it would be. I had given Marcus information over the years without thinking of it as giving him anything. Our mother's maiden name came up in a conversation once. My date of birth is in a family group chat. My social security number was written on a document I had asked him to mail for me almost 7 years before any of this started. None of those moments felt like risk. They were just ordinary pieces of a life lived in proximity to people you trust. I am more careful now. Not cold. Not suspicious of everyone I love. Just more careful. It is a reasonable adjustment to make. The house is good. The neighborhood is quieter than I expected. There is a coffee shop 2 blocks away that I go to on Sunday mornings and sit by the window with whatever I am reading. It is a simple thing. It is exactly what I was working toward. I built it on my own name, with my own credit, with my own money, after someone tried to make that impossible. They did not succeed.